The land of Oren stretched in silence, wide and broken. Dry winds moved across the plains, carrying dust into the air until the horizon vanished behind a dull haze. The sky was heavy, often filled with rolling storms that came without warning. At night, the stars glowed with sharp brightness, as if reminding those who lived on Oren how far they were from home. It was a lonely world, and for the humans who had crashed there, it was a world of endless struggle. Rian stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on the empty wilderness. He was not the oldest among the survivors, but the others often looked to him for decisions. His quiet nature and steady actions gave people hope when fear tried to break them. The camp behind him was small, built from the wreckage of the ship that had carried them across space. Metal plates were turned into walls, broken beams into shelters, and whatever little technology remained was used carefully, for no one knew how long it would last. Life was harsh. Food was always short. The soil of Oren was dry and bitter, unkind to seeds the humans had saved. Water had to be collected from hidden streams, and each journey to find it was dangerous. The wilderness was alive with sounds at night and shadows, often moved near the campfires. Strange creatures, quick and silent, sometimes took supplies or attacked. The people had learned to guard the camp in turns, never leaving it unwatched. Rian carried a spear made from a metal rod and sharpened stone. It was not strong, but it was enough to keep fear away. As he stood there, he thought of the faces behind him, the men, women, and children who waited for tomorrow. He remembered the colony ship, once filled with hope, carrying dreams of new life among the stars. That hope had turned into fire when the ship was struck by an unseen storm in deep space. They had fallen onto Oren with no choice but to live or vanish. Many had already perished in the early days. Those who remained clung to survival inside the camp. Voices murmured around the fire. A woman named Mira prepared a pot of thin stew, made from roots found earlier. Children huddled close, hungry eyes waiting for food. An older man, Darren, worked on fixing a broken tool. Each person carried weight, and each day was a test of endurance. They had no luxury of rest, no chance to dream of comfort. All they had was each other and the will to endure. Yet, even in hardship, there were moments of quiet strength. Rian often walked through the camp, speaking softly to those who struggled most. He knew that words could not fill empty stomachs, but they could steady a heart. "We will see another sunrise," he would say, and though the wilderness roared against them, the people believed him. His calm voice gave them courage when the nights grew long. That evening, as the sun sank behind the jagged rocks of Oren, the sky turned into a painting of deep red and fading gold. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the thin walls of the camp. Children pressed closer to their parents, and the firelight cast long shadows on the ground. Rian sat near the entrance, his spear resting across his knees. His eyes stayed, fixed on the darkness, searching for movement. He knew that every night was a test. Sometimes the creatures kept their distance, but other times they came closer, bold enough to test the defenses. Myra brought him a bowl of stew. "You should eat," she said, her voice low. Rian accepted it with a nod, though his thoughts remained on the wilderness. The food was warm but thin, and he shared half with Myra before finishing. There was no room for pride, only sharing. Every person in the camp learned this lesson, for selfishness meant death in a place like Oren. As night deepened, a sudden cry echoed from beyond the camp. Everyone grew tense. The children were pulled closer to the fire, and men and women reached for their makeshift weapons. Rian stood, spear in hand, his eyes searching the dark. He saw only the shifting shadows of the wilderness. The cry came again, this time softer, fading into silence. The air grew still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. After long moments, the danger seemed to pass, but the unease remained. Rian did not sit again. He stayed awake, watching, until the first light of dawn touched the sky. When morning came, the camp was weary but alive. The people gathered what little they had, preparing for another day of searching for food and water. Rian felt the same weight as always pressing on his shoulders, but he did not let it show. He looked at the tired faces, at the children who still found strength to smile, and at the wilderness waiting beyond. He knew the truth. Oren would not give them an easy life. But he also knew that as long as they stood together, the wilderness would not take them completely. The day began with silence, and the humans stepped forward once more, carrying hope like a fragile flame in the endless wilderness. The second morning, after the strange cries in the night, began with a heavy silence. The people of the camp moved carefully, as though the wilderness itself was listening. Rian walked with two scouts, Myra and Darren, across the dry plains. Their task was to search for water, for the camp supply was running low again. The land stretched endless before them, dry stone, scattered thorn trees, and broken ridges that reached high against the sky. Nothing about Orem was gentle, yet held secrets that the humans were forced to chase. The three walked for hours, the heat pressing on their backs. Dust clung to their skin, and their throats grew dry. When they reached a cluster of rocks, they stopped to rest. Mira leaned on her spear and looked across the horizon. "Do you see that?" she asked softly. Rian followed her gaze. At first, he thought it was only a shimmer of heat, a trick of the light, but then he noticed movement. Shapes walked in the distance, tall and steady, too smooth to be beasts. Darren narrowed his eyes, his old face lined with worry. "Not animals," he muttered. "Too straight, too calm." The figures grew clearer as they drew near. There were 6 of them, moving in silence across the land. They were humanoid in form, their bodies shaped like humans, but different in strange ways. Their skin glowed faintly silver, smooth as stone polished by water. Their eyes reflected light, sharp like blades. They carried no heavy weapons, only curved staffs made from dark wood. Their movements were graceful, like shadows that had learned to walk in daylight. Rian felt the hair on his arms rise. He had always believed Orn was empty except for beasts and storms, yet here stood proof of another people. He raised his hand, signaling Mira and Darren to stay behind him. The 6 figures stopped when they noticed the humans. For long moments, neither side moved. The wilderness wind whispered between them, carrying dust and silence. Finally, one of the silver-skinned beings stepped forward. It was tall, with calm eyes and a face that held no smile but also no anger. It raised a hand slowly, palm open. The gesture was clear. Peace, or at least no threat. Rian lowered his spear slightly but did not drop it. His voice was steady as he spoke. "We are travelers," he said. "We came here by accident. We mean no harm." The being tilted its head, listening as though the words carried weight beyond sound. Then it spoke, its voice soft and smooth, though the language was strange. The words were not clear, but the tone carried meaning. Caution, distance, warning. Rian realized they could not understand each other fully, yet he sensed the intent. These beings did not want humans to step closer. Myra whispered, "What are they?" Her eyes were wide, a mix of fear and wonder. Darren gripped his spear tightly, ready if danger came. The silver-skinned beings turned to one another, speaking in low voices that sounded like flowing water. Then, as one, they moved back, slowly retreating. Before they vanished into the distance, the tall one looked at Rian once more. There was something in its eyes, not hatred, not welcome, but a deep caution. Then they were gone, leaving only dust and silence behind. The 3 humans stood still for a long while, their hearts heavy with questions. Rian finally spoke. "We are not alone here." His words carried both hope and worry. If these beings were part of Orin, then perhaps there was a chance to learn from them. But if they saw humans as enemies, then the camp was in greater danger than ever before. When they returned to camp and told the others, the people gathered around the fire, whispering with unease. Some were afraid, believing the silver beings would attack. Others were curious, wondering if they could help. Mira told the children that the strangers looked like shadows made alive, and the story spread quickly. Fear and wonder mixed together, shaping the thoughts of every person. Rian sat apart, his mind deep in thought. He remembered the eyes of the tall being, the way it looked at him. There was no cruelty there, only caution. Perhaps the silver-skinned people were protectors of the land, and perhaps they saw humans as intruders. If that was true, then trust would not come easily. Yet, if they had survived here for so long, then they knew how to live where humans struggled. Rian wondered if there was a way to bridge the gap, to turn caution into respect. That night, the camp was restless. The fire burned low, and the wind carried the distant cries of creatures once more. Rian stayed awake, watching the wilderness. He thought of the silver beings moving like ghosts across the land. The wilderness was no longer only storms and beasts. It now held people who might hold the key to survival or the edge of destruction. For the first time since the crash, Rian felt the weight of something greater than hunger or thirst. The wilderness was alive not only with danger, but with the unknown, and the unknown had eyes that watched. The days after the first encounter with the silver beings were filled with unease. The people of the camp whispered at night, fearful that the strangers might attack, while others wondered if they were watching from the shadows. Rian, however, carried a different thought in his mind. He had seen caution in their eyes, not hatred. The wilderness was too harsh to allow hatred without reason. Perhaps the silver beings, whom he now called Solari in his thoughts, were only guarding their land. One evening, the camp faced another struggle. The water supply was nearly gone. The stream they had found earlier had dried under the sun, leaving only cracked earth. Without water, the camp could not survive long. Rian knew they had to search farther, deeper into the wilderness, but each step away from camp was dangerous. After much thought, he decided to try something bold. If the Solari had lived on Orin for generations, they must know where water could be found at dawn. Rian told Myra and Darren of his decision. "I will seek them," he said firmly. "If they know how to live here, then we must learn. If they refuse, at least I will know where we stand." Myra frowned. "And if they see us as invaders?" Rian looked at the dry soil under his boots. "Then at least we will know the truth. But to stay here with no water is certain death." Leaving the camp in careful hands, Rian set out alone into the wilderness. The sun rose high, and heat pressed against his shoulders. For hours he walked, across plains of stone and through valleys filled with thorn bushes. Finally, as the sun began to fall, he saw movement ahead. Figures moved gracefully along a ridge. His heart quickened. It was them. The Solari appeared as before, silent, watchful, their silver skin glinting faintly in the light. When they saw him, they paused, staffs held steady. Rian did not raise his spear. Instead, he laid it down on the ground and stepped forward slowly, his hands open. The gesture was simple but clear. It came with no threat. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, one of the Solari stepped forward. It was the tall figure from before, the one whose eyes had met Rian's on the plains. The being studied him with calm, unreadable expression. Rian spoke, his words steady though his throat was dry. "We are strangers here. We do not know this land. We suffer, and we seek to live. Teach us, or show us where to go." The tall Solari tilted its head, listening. Then it turned to the others, and they spoke together in soft voices. After a while, the tall one gestured for Rian to follow. Relief and caution mixed within him, but he obeyed. The Solari led him across a ridge and down into a narrow valley where stones gave way to green moss. Hidden between the rocks was a spring, clear water flowing gently into a pool. The sight struck Rian. With awe, he knelt beside the spring and drank deeply. The water was fresh, cool, and pure. When he looked up, the Solari watched him with still eyes. The tall one spoke a word slowly, pointing to the water. "Sarah." Rian repeated the word. "Sarah." The Solari nodded. A lesson had begun. In the days that followed, Rian returned to the valley with the Solari. They taught him how to move quietly across the land, how to listen to the wind to know when storms would come, and how to track the hidden paths of water. They showed him plants that could be eaten, roots that carried moisture, and signs of danger left by beasts. Each lesson was hard. When he moved too fast, they stopped him. When he tried to force a plant from the soil, they shook their heads. "Patience," their eyes seemed to say. One evening, as he practiced with them, a young Solari named Nira stepped closer than the others. Unlike the tall leader, her eyes carried curiosity. She pointed to his hands, rough with work, and then to his chest. "Human," she said in a soft tone. Rian nodded. "Human." She then touched her own chest lightly. "Solari." The word was spoken with calm pride. A bridge of understanding had formed, built on small words and shared lessons. When Rian returned to the camp and guided his people to the spring, hope rose again. The children drank deeply, laughter returning to their tired faces. Myra looked at him with wonder. "You found them again, and they helped you." Rian nodded but did not boast. "They helped us because we listened." The camp slowly began to change. With new water and knowledge of roots and plants, their lives grew a little stronger. Still, fear remained. Many whispered that the Solari might one day turn against them, but Rian believed otherwise. He had seen patience in their teaching, not cruelty. He had seen Nira's eyes filled with curiosity, not hatred. As night fell over the camp, Rian stood once more at the edge, spear across his knees. The wilderness was still dangerous, filled with beasts and storms, but now he no longer felt alone against it. The Solari were out there, not friends yet, but not enemies either. They were teachers, guardians of a land that tested every step. And in their lessons, Rian saw a truth forming. If humans wish to live, they must not fight the wilderness. They must learn from it. The days of peace were short on Orin. Though the spring gave the humans water and the Solari taught them lessons of survival, the wilderness was never silent for long. Each night, the cries of unseen beasts echoed through the valleys, and the winds carried scents that made even the Solari tense. Rian could feel change in the air, like the land itself was warning them of danger yet to come. One morning, as the sun rose over the jagged rocks, Mira rushed into camp, her face pale. "Tracks," she said quickly. "Large ones." Near the water valley, the people gathered in fear, murmuring about beasts that might have followed them. Rian and Darren went at once to see for themselves. The prints were deep in the soil, larger than any creature Rian had seen since the crash. The claws dug into the earth, sharp and heavy. Whatever made these marks was not a hunter of small prey. It was something built for destruction. That night, the camp could not rest. Shadows seemed thicker, and every sound carried weight. Even the children felt it, their laughter gone, replaced by silence. Rian knew he had to seek answers. He returned to the Solari Valley with Mira and met Nira near the spring. She saw the fear in his eyes before he even spoke. When he showed her the tracks, her calm face grew grave. She knelt, touching the marks with her silver fingers. "Ren," she whispered. The word carried dread. Rian repeated it slowly. "Ren?" Nira nodded. Her eyes lifted toward the dark cliffs beyond. "Old danger," she said, struggling to shape her words in human tongue. "Sleep. Long sleep. Awaken." She looked at him with heavy meaning. "Because of you." Her words struck deep. The humans had disturbed the land with fire, with noise, with building that was loud and unnatural. Perhaps their presence had woken something that the wilderness had long kept hidden. Rian felt the weight of guilt pressing on his chest. "What is it?" he asked. Nira drew the shape of a beast in the soil with her staff. The picture showed a massive creature, body thick like stone, jaws wide with rows of teeth. "Rin beasts," she said slowly. "Hunters of all, even Solari fear." When Rian returned to camp with this knowledge, fear spread quickly. Some wanted to leave at once, though there was nowhere safe to go. Others begged to fight, though their weapons were nothing more than sharpened stone and broken metal. Rian stood before them, calm but firm. "We cannot run. We cannot fight blindly. We must prepare, and we must do so together." His words carried strength, but doubt still weighed on the people. The next days were filled with tension. The Solari moved quietly through the land, setting traps and marking signs of the beast's movements. Rian followed them, learning all he could. The humans built stronger walls around the camp, stacking stones and tightening defenses. Even the children carried tasks, gathering wood or guarding water. Everyone knew danger was coming. One evening, Nira came to the camp with 2 other Solari. Their presence stirred unease among the humans, but Rian welcomed them. Around the fire, Nira spoke in slow words, explaining what the Solari had faced long ago. The Rin beasts were not endless in number, but one was enough to destroy a village. They hunted with patience, striking camps and tearing through defenses. Long ago, the Solari had driven them into deep caves, where they had slept for years. But the fire and noise of the human settlement had stirred them awake. Myra looked troubled. "So it is our fault." Nira's eyes were calm but firm. "Yes, but now we fight together, or fall alone." The message was clear. The Solari would not protect humans out of kindness. If the beasts grew bold, they would threaten both peoples. Survival was now a shared struggle. Rian felt both relief and burden. For the first time, Solari and humans would stand side by side. But could his people trust them? That night, as the fire burned low, Rian walked the edge of camp and watched the darkness. He remembered the early days, when all they feared was hunger and thirst. Now a greater danger moved beyond the ridges, waiting for the right moment to strike. The wilderness no longer felt like an empty place. It was alive, heavy with eyes and shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a roar rolled across the land. It was deep, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Children woke and cried, and the people pressed close to the fire. Rian stood tall, his spear in hand. He did not show fear, though his heart raced. The sound of the Rin beast was not just the cry of an animal. It was the sound of Aran itself, reminding them that survival here came at a cost. He looked at the faces of his people, then at the silver eyes of Nira watching from the firelight. They were no longer strangers. They were bound together by danger, by the wilderness that tested all. The hidden enemy had revealed itself. The time of silence was over. The struggle for survival had entered a darker, sharper path, and Rian knew there was no turning back. The roar of the Rin beast had shaken both humans and Solari. In the days that followed, the camp lived in constant tension. Each sound in the wilderness made people freeze. Each shadow felt heavier. Yet even under this fear, something new began to grow. The humans and Solari stood closer than before, forced to speak, to plan, and to share. The danger of the beasts was too great for either side to face alone. One evening, Rian sat with Nira near the fire. Around them, humans and Solari spoke in quiet voices, trying to bridge the gap between their worlds. Rian looked at Nira and asked, "Why do you fight for this land? Why not leave it behind?" Nira's silver eyes reflected the firelight as she answered slowly, shaping words with care. "Because this is home. Long ago, Solari came from stars, like you. Not born here, not shaped here, but the land changed us. It made us strong, or it would have broken us." Rian felt a stir of surprise. "You were not always here?" Nira shook her head. "No, we too were strangers. We too once feared the storms, the dry land, the beasts. Many fell, but some endured. Generations passed. The wilderness shaped us. What you see now is not what our first people were. We became Solari because Orin demanded it." Her words weighed heavily in Rian's mind. He thought of his people, weak and tired, struggling to find food and water. They were like the first Solari, clumsy and unprepared. Yet Nira's words carried more than history. They carried a promise. If the Solari had endured and changed, then perhaps humans could as well. The next morning, Rian shared what he had learned with his people. "They were not born of this land," he told them. "They came as we came. The wilderness shaped them, but it did not end them. That means we too can survive. We too can change. If we endure, we will not remain as we are. We will become stronger." His words gave strength to tired hearts. For the first time, humans began to see the Solari not only as strangers, but as mirrors of their own struggle. Still, trust was not easy. Darren, the older man, frowned. What if they only tell us this to keep us calm? What if they mean to use us or to push us away once the beasts are gone? Fear lived in many hearts, and Rian could not deny it. But he also remembered the eyes of Nira when she spoke. They carried truth, not lies. He answered firmly, "We cannot live by fear. Fear will kill us before the beasts do. We must try, or we are already lost." Together, humans and Solari prepared for what was coming. The Solari showed them how to shape stronger spears, binding stone to wood with dried vines. They taught them how to weave thorn barriers that could slow a beast. The humans, in turn, shared what little metal they had, sharpening edges for Solari staffs and building small traps. Day by day, the two groups moved with more unity. Where once they had watched each other with suspicion, now they trained side by side during these days of preparation. Rian often spoke with Nira. She told him stories of the first Solari, how they had lived in caves, hiding from storms and beasts, until they learned to read the land. She told him how their skin had grown tougher with each generation, how their eyes had learned to see through dust and dark. Rian listened with deep respect, for her words were not only stories. They were lessons. One night, as the camp rested, after long work, a sudden cry came from the edge. A young human boy shouted in fear as a shadow moved near the barriers. Spears were lifted and torches raised. The shadow slipped away, but the tracks it left behind were heavy and deep. The Rin beast was close, watching them. Panic filled the camp, but Nira stepped forward. Her voice, calm and strong, cut through the fear. "It tests us. It waits for weakness, but together, we are not weak." Her words carried across both humans and Solari. In that moment, the two groups felt bound by the same struggle. The wilderness did not choose between them. It tested all who walked its land, and those who survived were those who stood together. Later, Rian stood alone at the fire, thinking. He saw the tired faces of his people, the steady eyes of the Solari, and the shadows of the wilderness around them. He realized that this was the true struggle, not only to fight beasts or storms, but to choose unity over fear. to prove that humans could be more than survivors. They could be partners, builders of a new life. As the fire cracked softly, he whispered to himself, "This is not only our struggle. This is the struggle of all who live." The wilderness watched in silence. The beasts had not yet struck, but the ground trembled with the promise of what was to come. Humans in Solari were no longer strangers. They were no longer divided. They were bound by the same trial, by the same fight for tomorrow. And in that bond, something greater than fear began to rise. The night the Rin beast finally came was colder than usual. A heavy silence hung over the camp, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the nervous whispers of those who could not sleep. Rian walked the perimeter again and again, his war spear gripped tight in his hand. The Solari stood near the barriers of thorns, their silver eyes watching the wilderness with calm focus. Everyone knew the beast was close. Its roars had haunted them for days, moving nearer with each night. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A deep rumble rose through the earth, shaking stones and rattling the walls of the camp. Children clung to their parents, and the fire shuddered in the wind. Then, from the shadows of the ridge, the beast appeared. Its body was massive, covered in thick scales that glimmered like stone. Its jaws opened wide, rows of sharp teeth gleaming in the firelight. Eyes burned with a hunger that had no mercy. The people gasped in fear, but Rian shouted loudly, "Stand together!" His voice broke through the panic. Mira and Darren raised their spears. Nira and the Solari warriors lifted their staffs. The beast charged, its steps shaking the ground. The barriers of thorns cracked beneath its weight, but they slowed it enough for spears to strike from above. The air filled with cries, firelight, and the sound of battle. The humans fought with desperation, striking where they could, though their weapons barely pierced the scales. The Solari moved with practiced skill, leaping onto rocks and striking at weak joints. Rian stood at the front, shouting commands, his spear flashing again and again. The beast roared, swinging its massive tail and scattering fires to the ground. The camp shook as walls of wood and stone fell beneath its power. A torch was knocked into a broken shelter, and flames spread quickly. The camp was soon filled with fire and smoke. People screamed as they tried to save children and supplies. The beast pressed forward, drawn by the chaos. Rian felt the weight of the world pressing on him, but he did not yield. He leapt forward, driving his spear into the soft flesh of the beast's neck. The creature roared, swinging violently, and Rian was thrown hard to the ground. Pain shot through him, but he forced himself to rise again. Nira's voice rang out. Above the noise, together, she and two Solari leapt onto the beast's back, driving their staffs into its eyes. The humans rushed forward again, spears striking its underbelly where the scales were thinner. The battle was brutal. Every strike answered with blood and cries of pain. Many fell, their bodies crushed by the beast's fury. Finally, with a cry that shook the land, the Rin beast stumbled. Fire burned around it, smoke rising into the dark sky. It crashed into the remains of the barriers and did not rise again. The wilderness grew silent, broken only by the sound of fire and the cries of the living. When the battle ended, the camp was no longer the same. Half the shelters were gone, burned or crushed. Supplies lay scattered in the ash. The ground was stained with loss. People wept for those who had fallen, their tears mixing with the smoke. Children clung to their mothers, their small voices trembling with fear. Rian stood among the ruins, his chest heavy with sorrow. He saw Myra kneeling beside a broken wall, holding the hand of a friend who had not survived. He saw Darren sitting in silence, his face dark with grief. He saw Nira standing tall, her silver skin marked with ash and blood, her eyes steady but filled with quiet sadness. The Solari, too, had lost warriors. Their still bodies lay beside humans, no longer strangers, but brothers in struggle. Rian's heart ached as he looked at the destruction. The wilderness had tested them, and though they had survived, the cost was heavy. Tears fell from his eyes as he walked through the camp, speaking softly to those who grieved. They did not fall in vain, he told them. Their courage kept us alive. We will carry their strength into tomorrow. The fire slowly faded to embers, leaving the camp wrapped in silence. People sat close together, sharing warmth, sharing sorrow. The tears shed that night were not only for the fallen but for the life they had once dreamed of, a life that now seemed even farther away. Yet, within the sadness, a fragile hope still lived. Rian looked at Nira, who stood watching the dawn as the first light touched the sky. Her voice was calm when she spoke. The beast is gone, but more may come. The wilderness does not rest. It will test again. Rian nodded, his voice steady though his heart was heavy. Then we will stand again, humans and Solari, together. The survivors gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the rising sun. The wilderness had taken much from them, but it had not taken their spirit. They were still alive, still standing, and still bound together by struggle. The tears on their faces shone in the new light, not only tears of loss but also of strength. The night of fire and tears had changed them all. They were no longer only survivors. They were a people who had faced the wilderness and endured. The sun rose slowly over the broken camp, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and red. Smoke from the burned shelters still lingered, curling upward like faint ghosts of the night before. The people moved quietly, gathering what little remained of their supplies, tending to the wounded, and laying their fallen to rest. No one spoke loudly. The voices were soft, filled with both grief and respect. Rian stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on the wilderness beyond. The land stretched wide and untamed, endless in its silence. For a long moment, he thought of turning back, of giving up the dream of building a home here. But then he remembered the faces of those who had fought, the hands that had held spears beside him, and the courage that had burned in their hearts. He could not let their sacrifice fade into nothing. Nira walked to his side, her steps steady despite the wound she carried. Her silver eyes looked into the distance with the same determination. "The beast is gone," she said softly, "but the land will test us again. We must choose. Do we stay here and rebuild, or do we move to higher ground where the walls of stone may protect us?" Rian turned toward her, his face marked with ash and sorrow, yet alive with resolve. "We cannot remain among the ruins," he said. "The ground here has been burned, and the memories are heavy. We will build again, but in a place where hope feels stronger." Mira and Darren joined them, carrying tools and supplies. Behind them, others gathered, waiting for Rian's words. For many, his voice had become a guide, steady even in the darkest hours. He looked at them all, human and Solari standing side by side, and felt the weight of their trust. "We lost much," Rian began, his voice carrying across the camp. "But we are not broken. We fought together, we bled together, and we endured. Together. The wilderness wanted to end us, but it could not. Today we move forward, not in fear, but in strength. We will build a home worthy of those who gave their lives." The people raised their heads, their eyes shining with quiet fire. For the first time since the night of battle, hope returned to their faces. They began to move with purpose, gathering wood, lifting stones, carrying water. Children helped where they could, their small hands filled with determination. Even the wounded lent their strength. The journey to higher ground was slow but steady. The survivors carried what they could, leaving behind the ashes of the old camp. The wilderness loomed around them, vast and silent, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a challenge, a test they were ready to face. After hours of climbing, they reached a ridge where cliffs rose like natural walls. Streams of clear water flowed nearby, and tall trees spread their branches across the land. The place felt strong, protected, and alive. Rian knew at once this was where they would begin again. Here, the humans and Solari worked together, shaping wood into shelters, stones into barriers, and soil into gardens. Days passed, filled with effort and unity. The pain of loss remained, but it was carried not as a burden, but as a reminder of what they had survived. At night, fires burned in the center of the new camp. Songs rose from tired voices, simple songs of courage and memory. The Solari shared their old tales of survival, and the humans told their own, weaving a new bond between them. The children laughed once more, chasing each other beneath the stars. No longer afraid of the darkness, one evening, as the camp settled into its new life, Mira stood beside Rian and spoke with quiet pride. Our people were once divided by distance, by silence, and by fear. Now we are joined. We share not only the land but also the struggle and the hope. Rian nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. We are stronger because we are together. Alone we could not have survived, but together we will endure whatever comes. The wilderness is vast, but so is the strength of those who refuse to bow. Mira, Darren, and many others gather around them, listening, their hearts steady. A sense of belonging grew in the camp, greater than anything they had known before. It was not only a camp of survivors. It was a home of unity. The wilderness beyond still stretched wide, filled with dangers yet unseen, but the people no longer feared it. They had faced its worst and lived to tell the story. They knew more trials would come, more nights of fire and tears, but they also knew their strength was greater than any storm. On the highest rock above the camp, Rian placed a simple marker made of stone. It was not only for the fallen, but for the beginning of a new story. Carved into the stone were words simple and true. We endured. We will endure again. As the sun set, painting the sky in deep red and gold, the people stood together, human and Solari, side by side. Their faces carried the marks of struggle, but also the light of hope. The wilderness stretched before them, endless and wild, but they no longer felt alone. They had found something greater than survival. They had found each other. And so, the story of humans and Solari did not end in tears. It began anew, written in courage, unity, and the promise of a future they would build with their own hands.